This is me, Tim Holmes, Senior Partner of Sirdar Group. And what we're going to talk today about is really the concept of succession planning and some of the reasons why. Let's discuss and talk through some of the reasons why people don't think about succession planning. And that we had lots of discussion about what we should call this particular webinar. And really it's about, if you haven't got a proper succession plan, what typically happens is you can't step out of the business long enough to take leave. And if anything happens to you, whether you get sick or whether hopefully you don't, but if you die, then what happens to the business next? Does it survive without you? So this was, as I said, my name is Tim Holmes from Sirdar. I've been with Sirdar for the last 7, nearly 8 years. And the reason why we've got a few pictures of mountains is because Sirdar is the name for the lead Sherpa on a mountain expedition. So we're talking about helping and supporting you to climb your mountain, climb your Everest. But what drives me personally is to really make sure that we have throughout this continent and ultimately throughout the world, some really top quality directors. So we have good directors around. There's an awful lot of the newspapers in South Africa that we read about almost daily, and I'm sure there are elsewhere where there are not so good directors. But we want to really make sure that we're driving and performing and helping to support people to become great directors. And that could be a starting point of now you're an executive, and it may be something you only do in a few years' time, but you can learn even as an executive about how to be a director, because it'll help you support those in your organization who are directors and the board that you might report up to or send information up to. So we'll talk a little bit more about the training we've got at the end, the Applied Directorship Program. But as I said, the fundamental difference is a really great director, if they're helping and supporting an organization to run truly effectively, then they can have a massive impact. That organization can have a massive impact on communities, on employing more people, spreading the love of making sure that people are earning a decent wage, giving them proper benefits and other aspects that you have the capacity to do as a business, so that we actually fundamentally change lives. So I'm just going to do a quick poll just to get a little bit more of a sense of who we've got in the room. It helps me to understand whether you are an entrepreneur and you are a shareholder and a manager in that business, or whether you are an executive director or aspiring to be an executive director. So for this exercise, if you are currently an executive and the intention is to become an executive at some point, then please tick that box. Non-exec director, so you're serving on someone else's board, the board of a company you don't work with, or you're aspiring to be a non-executive director. So that's maybe a career move you have, you're a consultant or something along those lines, but you want to move into the space of becoming a non-exec director. So just launch that poll. So tick whichever is relevant. If it's more than one, then fantastic, but just gives me a really good idea of who I'm talking to, and we can try and frame the language accordingly. Good to see a few aspiring non-exec directors. This is a tough journey you're launching yourself on, so I wish you all the best, but we can try and help and support you as much as possible. Existing non-exec directors, so a lot of the training we do is to enhance and sharpen that saw, so fill in the gaps of knowledge and understanding, which is what all the Applied Directorship Program is all about. Executive directors, as I said, it really helps to support either if you're serving on a board, is your skill and ability and understanding, and if you aren't quite there yet, then even if you're just supporting a board, it makes a massive difference to really have a good understanding about what that means. And shareholder managers, good. So yes, entrepreneurs typically fall into that space, and I'll be talking a lot about that in a second. Thank you. I'm just going to close that poll. Okay, so the other thing I wanted you to please do, either put it in the Q&A box, put it in the chat, just make a note on a piece of paper in front of you for reference later. But coming into this webinar, specifically, what is your biggest question regarding succession planning? What are you struggling with that you're trying to get an answer to, guidance with? What have you seen as being issues and you're not quite sure what caused them? Whatever that question is, then please write it down and make a note, as I said, in the Q&A box if you'd like me to pick it up later in the presentation. Or by all means, you can email it to us afterwards. But just make a note so that we know whether we've covered that off or not. And this is really the ultimate problem with not planning and not having a succession plan. Is this what could happen? And this could be a large organization or a small organization. I've seen examples of both. And really in the COVID times, it's something we actually need to think very, very carefully about. And we will all die. And unfortunately, in current circumstances, that's happening a lot sooner than any of us expected. But when we die, will your business die with you? So that's what I want to try and highlight, is that this is a problem which has real consequences if we don't plan our succession effectively. I just want to tell a little bit of a story by way of introduction. Really simple story, but I figured that this kind of really micro enterprise, as my mother's business was, teaches a lot of the same lessons which apply regardless of how big the business is. So I thought, well, if I come up with a really simple example, hopefully that'll get some of the concepts across, so that when we start to broaden that and look at enterprises and shareholders and all of those kind of things, it sets some kind of context. And hopefully all of you have had someone in your family who's been running a small business which either worked out really well or didn't work out so well. So my mother's still alive, so that answers the previous question. If you're thinking, did her business survive when she died? She's still alive, but no, unfortunately, her business hasn't survived in that she's not able to run it anymore. So brief history. When I was very young, I think 6 or 7 years old, my mother used to collect a lot of antique furniture, and she got into antique maps because they were smaller and easier to store than large chests of drawers and other pieces of large Georgian furniture, which she was currently collecting, and became very interested in this to the point where she became quite skilled and quite knowledgeable. And as people do, went to a shop and asked them if they had some space that she could rent. And eventually she opened half the shop in the antique shop in our little provincial town in England. And that became a map shop. So she ran that for a couple of years. And again, continued to build her knowledge and understanding and build her client base, but very quickly realized that it was a very small provincial town and very small number of potential customers in what is quite a niche product set. So she started to branch out. So when she went national, she went to all of these big country fairs that they have all over England, or they used to have, should I say, because they haven't had very many in a while. They were large game shows, typically with horse competitions, or they had shooting competitions, outdoor big event, and lots of these trade stands, as they called them, around the main areas where the spectators used to walk through. And good potential for selling antique maps, but also sporting prints. So she branched out to different product sets, a little bit more popular. So she had sort of animal portraits and that kind of thing. Not really antique, but to appeal to the same kind of market, and gave her an opportunity to not only talk to the sort of landed gentry and have maps for their stately homes and their large manor houses, but something a little bit smaller, a little bit more affordable, maybe a picture of a horse jumping, or a picture of a particular animal, so a Labrador, a Spaniel, or whatever that someone had. So she started to build out her product set, but was very, very skilled and had a lot of knowledge and understanding about maps. So this particular example on here is by a cartographer called John Speed from 1627. And that was what sort of her top of the range kind of map that she would sell. Now, she loved the whole prestige of going to these big events, having a stand, being a trade exhibitor. You have a pass you put on your car and you can pull in the middle of the showground and unload your stuff, and talking to the landed gentry in the local region and having them as clients. She absolutely loved that, and it fed her ego, which is what happens often when we become very skilled at something and we start to drive the business based a lot more on ego than necessarily on common sense and good business practice. So she knew all of these people. She formed close relationships with these people and knew their names, knew what they bought, knew where they lived, and started to build up quite a complicated database around the country. But most of it was in her head or on little lists of pieces of paper about when we go to the Burley horse trials, these are the clients, and it's on these 5 pages of my little book. And when we go to somewhere else and it's that show, these are the particular clients, and they're in my little book. So it was nothing that was really put into any kind of system. And who was her team? Well, my father, my sister, and I were her team, and we used to pack prints, and we used to sit in front of TV with cellophane bags and put things into wrappers. But we didn't really get any training in how to do the selling or have enough skill and understanding of some of these more expensive maps to be able to really have that kind of conversation with anybody when we were helping out on the stand. So we were effectively in what I'll talk about a little bit more in this sort of craft concept. We were typically the lackeys, or maybe you could say we might have been an apprentice, because we were learning some of the trade, but nowhere near enough to actually be able to have a proper sales conversation with one of the more sophisticated clients. We were just helping her move stuff around and making sure that her stock was properly protected. And as I said, very little training. So the very typical small business kind of problem is that you've got one person who knows everything about what's going on. You have a few other helpers who know some of what's going on, but definitely not enough to be able to form a meaningful sales and marketing role. There's no systems built into place. So lo and behold, when she started to get a bit older, she wanted to sell the business. She wanted to hand it over to someone. None of us in our family were particularly interested. We'd all gone to do other things. I was doing engineering. My sister was selling houses. My father was commuting to London. None of us were going to take over this little antique maps and prints business. And she tried to get some other people to buy it, but they quickly found out when they went to a show that she knew all the people. It was really difficult to break into that and take over those relationships because it was mostly in her head. Oh, I remember when 5 years ago you bought so-and-so. I've just found another one. Here it is. Would you like to buy it? It's really, really difficult to take over from that kind of business. So what happened now, 20 years later, we've got a huge shed outside behind their house, my mother's house, which is full of prints that she can't sell. She can't give away. Doesn't want to give away because in her mind, she paid X for it, but the market is saying, I'm going to pay Y or nothing for it. Things have moved on. She hasn't worked out how to sell on the internet. The tastes have changed. People don't have expensive maps on their walls in England to the same extent as they did then. People don't have antique furniture even in their houses anymore. It's much more modern prints, whatever. Yes, there's a niche, but you need to find it across the world, which means you have to go online in order to better continue in this space. So now, hasn't been able to sell it, hasn't been able to hand it over to anybody, hasn't been able to get rid of most of the stock that's now sitting in a shed, which you can't even burn down because you can't insure it. Not that I would advocate that you insure things to burn them down, but there's just like no options. Your only option is to put it all in a truck, take it to a sale room and get a few quid for it if someone buys it at all. So as an example, it's a very simple but very common example of what happens when there is zero proper succession plan. And also the difference between a succession plan of something that you call a craft and something that we would call an enterprise. So that's what I really want to go through in a minute. So let's talk about the craft versus enterprise concept. Then I'll go into the succession planning differences between the two, because there are quite fundamental differences. Then we'll have some questions at the end. And then if we've got time, we'll go through the ADP introduction. Hopefully you've got time to go through it. So craft versus enterprise, as I said, craft typically has that mindset of it's someone making something, it's a small or a micro enterprise. But what I would like to try and bring across as an understanding is this craft is a mindset. It's not just necessarily a size of business concept. So yes, a doctor will be typically a craft because they go in and they have a surgery and they have a receptionist and they maybe have a couple of helpers. That doctor could also build a business that is not entirely reliant on them, which we call an enterprise. The difference in particularly about the craft mindset is that we think we're building a business and we think that we are at the top of that business and we are, you know, the driving it and pulling it with us and taking the business forward. But where we actually are is we are a founder, we are the foundation block, we are the framework, the thing that holds the business together. And if you take that individual away, then the business becomes very shaky and often quickly collapses. So a craft is very much about the individual and their skill and ability, like my mum. Her business was based on her expertise in maps and sporting prints. It wasn't about a system. It wasn't about a distribution network. It wasn't about some other business concepts that could be expanded and franchised and whatever else. It was all in her head or in a few pieces of paper. So you take her out, there is nothing left other than a pile of paper. The other problem is that it's the world on your shoulders. If you're hearing this language in an organization, this could be in a department, it could be as a small business, a small craft business, or micro enterprise. This mindset could appear anywhere, but it feels the same. And it's driven by, you have the final say. All the decisions come through you. Maybe your role as a leader is not clearly defined, which means no one's really sure where else to push a decision. So they tend to push it through you. Little's being documented, so you don't have standard operating procedures or whatever it is that someone else can then do the work. So it tends to become a tell kind of conversation rather than a delegation and an education kind of relationship. It's more of you're managing, but you're not really leading, because you're not giving people the opportunity to take responsibility for their particular aspects. It's all coming through you. And as I said before, that can often be largely driven by ego or insecurity. I don't know how to let go. I don't want to let go. I don't want to have that threat of someone who knows as much or more than me, etc. So if we hear this, if we say this, no one can do better this than me, then really that's what I'm talking about in terms of the craft mindset. So it's about being a craftsman, about your own knowledge, utilizing your own knowledge in your craft and sharing your knowledge with your team. But in other words, you're owning a job. You're not owning a business if you're an entrepreneur. And you're also not necessarily supporting the enterprise if you were in a larger organization, because it becomes like a little fiefdom. It becomes a silo because it's not well integrated with everything else that's going on. So as I said, enterprise is usually a bigger business, but it tends to be a mindset. So the difference between starting a business, you've got one founder and they bring in one or two other people. Craft starts to move very quickly towards that craft space based on whoever the second or third people are that organization employs. So if it employs someone who knows less than the craftsman, craftswoman, and the idea is that they help and support the craftsman or craftswoman to do a better job and charge a higher rate and have more productive hours doing their thing, then you are moving rapidly towards the craft, and it typically drives the way the rest of the organization goes forward. If the first person you employ is someone who does one piece that you don't like doing better than you, and even much better than you, and could even be seen as being a threat from an expertise and a level in the organization perspective, then you're firmly moving towards an enterprise, because it's a clear understanding of what do I do best? What is my value that I bring to the organization? And how do I bring someone else in to take over the pieces that I don't like doing? But it means there's less reliance on you. So the first principle, be able to operate without the immediate involvement of the founder on a day-to-day basis. So if you've got this right, you've already started the process of a succession plan, because less of what you do is reliant on it being you. It means that other people in the organization can do at least some of what you do and can cover, if you're not available, of some or most of what you do. And then it's really just starting closing the gaps and filling the spaces. And the second piece is the business itself has a significant value, because again, the value of the business is not just you. The value of the business is in the systems and the processes and the assets and everything else that exists within the organization. So the game rules are different. And we now need to think about shareholders, directors, and managers, which is why the succession planning is different in an enterprise concept, because there are shareholders, directors, and managers versus the craft, which is typically, as I said, a job, and it's more like a sole proprietor. So it's understanding which game you're playing and which game you're playing in. So in your organization, regardless of size, are you playing a single person or 2 or 3 person sport like tennis or squash or badminton or whatever it is, or are you playing a team sport? And is that the way the whole organization is constructed, that you work together and you support each other and you can bring new players in and players can move on without disrupting the entire team? Then you know you've got a clear separation between the mindset of craft and mindset of enterprise. So it's about making a choice and moving forward with clarity on which way we're going. And it's not a fork junction, it's an absolute T-junction. They are very, very different spaces. So there are examples in companies I've worked with where they've got 50 or 100 employees, but they've got a craft mindset in leadership. And companies where maybe 10 employees, where they've actually got an enterprise mindset in leadership. And they will grow in different ways. But what's most important is that if the founder has some kind of issue, gets sick, can't work anymore, doesn't want to work anymore, dies, whatever it might be in a craft-led business, then ultimately the business suffers, and it suffers really badly unless another master craftsman can be brought in quickly to keep it going. So succession, why don't we plan for it? Well, we think, I'm not going anywhere, I'm going to be here forever, I have no reason to go, this is my business, I'm going to continue to run it. No one knows how this business works as well as I do. If you want it done right, do it yourself. It's all about the sort of craft kind of thinking, and it stops us making the decision of thinking about what would happen if we're not around. And it's really difficult to obviously find someone who's going to take your role if you are building a craft. So it's very, very important that as a craft, you make sure you are putting as much of the money you are earning into assets outside the business, because what's potentially going to happen is that the business will fail, go into liquidation, and there's nothing to hand over to anyone else. So actually your succession is really about either finding another craftsman or building one up and bringing one up with you that you can hand the business over to, or realize that actually it ends with you and you need to make sure that your legacy is somewhere else. You've got a property portfolio, you've got a share portfolio, whatever it is that protects your family and their livelihoods going forward. And where does it typically go wrong? We get stuck in ego and pride. So we don't want to let go of things. We don't want to let go of that prestige, that status, our status in society, because we say we own, that's our business, we own it. Shareholder manager power struggles. So all of those kind of things start to come into play. So we haven't dealt with them. So it's really difficult to work out what the succession planning is going to look like. And the business is not set up to be scalable. So it's not saleable rather. So the more you move into the enterprise space, the easier it is to build a business which is saleable. And if Spice or Young either doesn't want to take over, or if they did take over, they would be unable to drive the business because they just don't have the skill or ability, or they're too young to actually do it. Or there's just no one. So there are no children. There may be no spouse even. There is no partner. There's no one to take over. So then we really, really, really need to start thinking about succession and what it is we really want from this business going forward. So as a craftsman, as I said, build up the other craftsman or woman. Teach them everything you know. Give them the space to learn, to find their own voice, find their own style, so that there is maybe a period of transition. Maybe they even go and set up their own business under a different brand, but there's an agreement between the two of you that you maybe invest in that business, or you get some benefit from that business, or they take over your business as is. And again, what are we going to do in terms of, are we going to sell it? Are we going to take over? Is it a partnership and you put in sweat equity and then that's what you get for the sweat equity? But again, it's understanding that the business itself doesn't necessarily have much value other than paying a salary. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do with that salary? Where am I going to put that salary so I have something to live off? Whereas an enterprise is quite different because you've got the different roles. You've got the shareholder, director, and manager. So it's understanding what is your role, because the succession in each will be different. So if we're looking at the shareholders, the directors, managers, the shareholders are investing for a return. So if you are the shareholder and you're looking to get out of a business, what is your exit plan? It's what are you going to do with the investment piece? Are you going to donate that investment piece to someone? Are you going to sell that investment piece to someone? What are you going to do with it? And as a director, you're championing the promise, you're driving the business forward, you're a leader in the business. Now, what am I going to do in terms of that succession? Well, I probably need to bring in another director onto the board now, possibly a non-exec director is a good opportunity, and then train them up so they understand the business. So if I'm not in that space, if I'm not sitting in that boardroom directing the business anymore, I know that there's a really good team there that can carry the business forward. And if I've got a management role, that's all about bringing the promise to life. So if I've got any of the other hats, then hopefully I've built the team at that level that will be able to continue to run the business. But if I've got a very specific skill as a manager, then it's more of like a craft mindset kind of thing. I've got to hand that over to someone. I've got to train someone up. I've got to make sure it's documented. I've done some videos on how to do something, etc. And maybe bring that person through the organization, mentor them, etc., to reduce the risk. And I saw an example yesterday of a large business in Europe, big business in Europe with branches all over the world. The head of African region has retired. And the people who are on the receiving end, the clients, are realizing there was absolutely zero succession plan. Suddenly they've gone from the regional head of Africa to the head of the world, who's running around trying to keep up with all of the different things happening all over the place. They hadn't thought about and hadn't planned for, hadn't executed any kind of proper succession plan for this person who's retiring. Crazy, crazy stuff. But it happens in big organizations just as it happens in small. So managing the management of the shareholding. So what is my role? Or management or shareholder, couldn't see my slide, sorry. So are you in management and you are leaving, or you want to leave, or you want to retire, or you want to sell out, whatever it might be, but you're in the management role. So what is the succession plan? Have I defined the role? Have we recruited against that role? Have we got the standard operating procedures in place? Have we done the training? Have we got a mentorship program? All of those kind of things will help immensely when you're handing over in the executive space. Shareholders, much more about, well, what am I selling? Do I understand what that is that I'm selling? Who am I going to sell it to? When am I going to sell it? Am I going to sell it long before I want to exit? Or am I going to sell it only when I exit? And then the how. So there's various different ways that you can sell a business. You could sell the shares internally, so it could be a management buyout. You could sell them externally to a VC or sell the whole company. Various different options in terms of selling it externally. That obviously gives you your return on investment for the share. Or you could, if the business operationally is a little bit too reliant on you, or maybe the market you're in's not in a great space, then there's an opportunity to sell the assets and get some value from that, or merge with someone else. And then you start to get into the conversation about, well, do I want to donate this to either family members, or other relatives, or I want to donate it to the other shareholders. I don't want to sell my share to the other shareholders. I'm going to give my share to the other shareholders, or I'm going to give it to a foundation. Or, look, I haven't got any other shareholders. I really don't have a management team that I think is up to the job. I need to plan how we're going to liquidate this business, which might mean you've got a long-term goal of thinking about where your team might go and how you break that business up so it doesn't affect the creditors and suppliers that you've got a long relationship with, et cetera, et cetera. So very, very, very different plans and outcomes. And things like having a will. So get some tax advice. If you're selling shares, get tax advice, because there's all kinds of potential issues with capital gains, et cetera. And again, the difference between tax for selling and donating. What's going to happen to dependents? Where's the value going to go? So if you do sell it externally, how do your dependents get that value? Where do you put it? Do you keep the shares? Does the new owner pay you dividends? Whatever it might be. And again, are you going to sell to partners? Are you going to give to partners, etc.? And one thing that can help the transition of this sort of succession at shareholder level is if the intention is for the other shareholders, your one or two partners, to buy you out, have they got the cash to do that? Has the business got the cash to do that? And if not, then are you taking life assurance out on yourself, paid for by the business? So the business is the beneficiary, which will then give the business the cash to buy you out so that your dependents get the money. Otherwise, it's going to only come in dribs and drabs when the shareholders have the money, or it could potentially bankrupt the shareholders because this is in your will and the transaction needs to happen now. They must pay now. So all of those things in terms of shareholder succession plan need to be thought out really carefully. And this was just an example of, I spotted something on the internet, how to sell, should I sell my architectural firm? And guess what's on the list? Get an external valuation, work out what this thing's worth, succession planning, and an ownership transition. So key points on their list. So this is absolutely critical that we get this stuff right. So be proactive with a plan, pinpoint the succession candidates, whether you're talking about shareholding, whether you're talking about director, whether you're talking about manager. Who are those individuals that you will be handing over to and over what kind of timeline? Let them know. So have the conversation. So it's not a big surprise. Too often we keep these things secret and it becomes a big surprise, and then it's a failure because they're not ready, whatever that transition looks like. Set up professional development efforts. So if you've got managers that you want to succeed you in particular roles, how are you developing them? How are you developing the team to succeed you as the main decision maker in the business? How are you lifting them up? How are you bringing them together so that the team replaces you and takes the business forward? Do a trial run. So what is a particular thing that you don't want to do anymore? Well, try setting up a succession plan for that, because it'll teach you a lot about all the processes in place, what the quality of the team members are that you thought you were going to be handing over to, and maybe you are, and maybe you aren't now, with having been through that experience, etc. And also thinking about when you're bringing people into the organization, how does that fit into your exit strategy, your succession plan? And very much it comes down to thinking about your own successor, not just thinking about the other people in the organization, because we have this thing of, I'm not going anywhere, I'm immortal. I am an entrepreneur, I am immortal. Scary thing was Constantiaberg Hospital in Cape Town, and the stats last week were 9 out of 10 of the people who were in ICU with COVID complications were middle-aged men. So just bear that in mind, we are not immortal. This was just an example just to see the real life difference between a business that's been set up with a craft that's reliant on the founder and one that's set up with a lot more systems in place, and what you could expect in a retirement situation. So building a business, get a good salary. I haven't got many staff to worry about. It's all great. I'm doing the work. I'm getting a great amount per hour. I'm taking in whatever it might be, a salary, 50, 100,000, I mean, 500,000, 600,000 salary. I'm taking half the profit. So I'm probably earning 800,000, 900,000. Life's great. But if I sell the business, I get virtually nothing. Bigger enterprise, few more people, but it's a dedicated workforce, very well trained, really good quality, high quality equipment. There's a hierarchy in place. There's quality control measures in place. I've got systems everywhere. And I've built the system in the management perspective that, yes, I'm probably giving a lot of strategic guidance. Yes, I'm driving all of this stuff now, but there's potentially a strong enough team that can take over a lot of that work from me. And you can immediately see it in the asking price is the same as 1 year's revenue. It's double the multiple of the single one-man show kind of thing. And that's the multiples you need to look at, not necessarily the rand or dollar value. It's what multiple am I getting on my revenue or my profit? Because what that comes out in the end is, example one, if we just take that, as I said, salary, been taking 500,000, dividend, took half the profit, pretty decent salary in South African context. But when you sell the business, don't rely on that business being an asset, because your pension will be whatever that is, 20% of what you earned before. Meanwhile, the other option, I was probably taking more. You know, this is a decent sized business, doing well, good dividends, etc. I put a lot of the dividends back into the business so I could afford all this fancy equipment. But if I sell it for 32 million, my pension's nearly 3.5 million. I might even be better off than I was when I was earning a salary. So it's really, really important that when we're succession planning, particularly at shareholder level, that we understand what kind of business we've got, which is why I talked about the craft-based enterprise, and then also what are we going to do with it. So what game are you playing? What legacy are you going to leave? Are you going to make sure that you have got some insurance policies and assets in other properties and other things because that's where the legacy is going to live? Or have I built a business that's saleable, scalable, it's run by a really effective team, it's going to be going for the next 50, 100 years because it's really well constructed? And how are you going to get there? What is your succession plan or your exit strategy? Have you thought it through at all the different levels? So quickly take some questions on that. And then if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about the Applied Directorship Program, which is really designed to teach executives and non-executives about how to really truly live this thing called being a director, how to be as skilled as you possibly can be so that you are driving the organization towards being an enterprise from a place of knowing and understanding, and you've got some kind of skill. So what have we got? Questions? Any questions in the questions box or anything in the chat box? So if you'd like to find out a little bit more about the Applied Directorship Program, please stay on the call and I'll make every effort to be finished by 1 o'clock as advertised. Any questions? Establishing whether a family member is a good fit for the business and the hard discussions given they aren't or don't want to be part of a business. So thank you, Brett. Good question. I took the opportunity when I was sitting next to someone at a wedding a couple of years ago who was part of a business that had been around for 350 years. And my question to her was, how many generations have you been around? How long have you been going for? She said, no, we don't talk about generations anymore. We talk about centuries. Well, how on earth do you do that? So the very successful multi-generational businesses, which break through the second or third generation, which is typically when most family businesses fail, they have identified at a very early stage what each child that's coming into the family's interests are, what they are likely to be good at, what of those skills or interests or potential talents are going to be useful for the business. So the particular example was they were in wine and food and spirits. So are you interested in cooking and food? And are you interested in wine and spirits? If not, then we'll fund you to go and be a graphic designer or whatever it might be, or a doctor or a nurse or some kind of other engineer. So it's working out from a very early age, what are the skills, abilities, preferences, where are they best going to be able to create value in the world? If that fits in the business, then get them involved as early as possible. If not, give them all support you can to take them forward in whatever direction they go. What held the family together from a financial perspective was being really clear on how the shareholding structure worked and how the dividends were paid out to family members, so that you felt that you were part of the family and you got the benefit of the family at the shareholder level, but you didn't necessarily get value from a salary. It wasn't a guarantee that you were going to get value from a salary. But everyone in the family understood that if the businesses are running effectively and running well and maybe using professional managers, then we will get the benefit at the shareholder level. So let's rather do what we want to do and where we think we can best add value, rather than have a situation where it's your birthright to get a job, which is often where things go wrong, because there isn't the drive to perform, there isn't the drive to contribute, because it's seen as a birthright. Well, I'm going to get a job anyway. I'm going to get a salary anyway. So it's a really long answer, but I hope that helps, because it's so critical. And a Kenyan business I'm working with, or have been working with, is going through that pain of working out, what is the family about? What is the benefit of being in the family? If it's not just to have an opportunity to work within the portfolio of family companies. So yes, this stuff is tough. It's hard conversations. It's facilitated conversations in some cases, because we just don't know how to do it. We've never had to do it as a family. So I hope that helped, Brett. Anything else? Let's move on. And if anybody wants to contact me, by all means, please contact the person who got you onto this call and sent you the invite. But if you need to contact me for anything or any further information, then is my details, and then we'll also send out the recording afterwards, so you'll be able to pick up the slide. One question, Q&A. Shareholder CEO in the process of transitioning to board of directors, challenges that sometimes entrepreneurs look for a CEO which is mirroring us. How do we deal with that? Very good point. So part of the Applied Directorship program is introducing the concept of how do we build teams using profiling tools. So a major part of making sure you are recruiting effectively, and this definitely applies to CEOs, but it applies throughout the organization, is understanding what is the profile of the individual, in other words, how does their brain work? What is their preference in terms of activities? Do they prefer to work with people, or do they prefer to work with data? Do they prefer to be at the front end and doing new technologies and new things, or do they prefer to be working with systems and processes? And work out what is relevant in the particular department, so that when you build the team, you're getting the right people in the right places. The CEO is very much linked to what the stage of growth is in the organization. So if there's a real need for innovation, there's a real need for new products, new directions, new expansion, whatever it is, then you want a high activating energy person in that CEO role. If it's about building the team and inspiring the team and driving the forward, Jack Welch it's all about the people, because there's a good foundation already and we don't need to drive innovation at the same extent. There's an innovation is built into one of the departments or the fabric of the business itself. Then the leader needs to be inspiring the people and taking the organization forward from that perspective. Then you need to get a high inspiring energy individual in that role. If it's about process, then it's a high sustaining energy. And there are very many businesses that are led by high refining energy people, where the business is all about data. Look at Google. Google is all about data. It's all about making money on little bits and pieces and clicks and everything else. The leaders of Google are almost certainly high refining energy, because that's the way they've built their business. It's not about show. It's not about their faces everywhere. It's about doing the things right in the background so that all you have to do as a user is click once. So it's understanding the cycle of businesses, the type of businesses, and then finding a profile that best fits and is best likely to lead in that particular way. And that may be very different from you. And then the next piece is making sure that you've got a good organizational culture fit. And then have they got the requisite skills in terms of understanding general management, etc., having had some kind of leadership role in the past. So that would be the way that we would typically approach it. And as I said, there's a lot of that on Contribution Compass, which is a tool we use on the Applied Directorship Program. Last question before and I'll go into the Applied Directorship Program intro. Trust single-handed bought property and funds generated from leasing. Power teenagers. Nothing has been put in place with succession planning. I'm not sure what a pour over is. So yeah, I mean, often where it's a small business, it's really understanding what can I hand over to someone else? What situations can I place? Who can I partner with potentially? So if there's a charity that's similar to what I'm doing, or sorry, if it's whatever, bought a property and funds generated from leasing. So if you've got a property, then who could you possibly sell that to, hand that over to, start thinking about what that looks like, so that you've got some kind of exit plan in place. Because yeah, otherwise, if it's good, generating good money and it's in a trust, then you just need to find a manager. But if there's some other, like the donation part, that would very much be looking to see if you can find someone else who does something similar that you can maybe work with. Also gives the opportunity for more scope, more resources, more potential to contribute and do more good. Okay, so just go on to ADP. I'm struggling with slides here. So what we're trying to achieve is, with the Applied Directorship Program, we were trying to generate, as I said before, great directors. So a high performance director is one who's obsessed with creating meaningful economic impact, and that obviously includes social impact or any impact that can potentially improve the economic situation of all stakeholders. So it's a pretty broad context, but it's the impact piece that's critical. And they do it through their role on the board. So what are they doing in driving what's in best interest of the company? How do they make sure the business grows? How do they get out of their own way and make sure they're not bringing ego to the play? And they're doing a completely selfless job in terms of what's in the best interest of the business, but also particularly as non-exec directors not being afraid to have the tough conversations. So if you've got a dominant CEO, dominant founder on the board, it's really critical that you have a really good understanding of what your role entails. You have a really good understanding of what your responsibilities are as a director, so you can have that tough conversation because you know you're right. It's the right thing to do. And it's either going to highlight some potential risks that existing shareholders and management aren't seeing, or it's going to potentially mean that they're not interested, they're not listening. Then you need to get out of that space and go and find a board that's a little bit more likely to be able to use the value you're adding. But it's a tough conversation either way. And this whole leadership and governance is a continual work in process, I'm sure you're starting to understand now. So what's the program? It's about doing. So we don't want this to be a degree. We don't want this to be a diploma. We want you to actually practice what you need to practice in a boardroom context. So the entire course is based on 8 board meetings covering the 8 areas of strategy, which we think that boards should be covering at least annually. And then a couple of introduction sessions at the beginning and a closing out session at the end. So it's just like mountaineers. And as I said, Sirdar is about climbing mountains. You don't learn to climb by doing a degree. You learn to climb by practicing on the mountain, and Direct's no different. We can give you the theory, and it's part of the course, it's part of the online platform, but you need to practice it. You need to put it into practice, learn, reflect, put it into practice again, learn, reflect again. And we've identified that it takes probably 3 or 4 of those board meetings before most directors really start to go, okay, now I get it. Now I can perfect what I've learned. I'm not just trying to work out how this whole thing should be done. And being evaluating high performance director requires time, energy, and guidance. So the idea is if you don't have the time for this training, then the likelihood is you're not going to be able to contribute at the level you should be contributing on a board. So it's ultimately about committing yourself to your development and then dedicating that time and energy as much as you possibly can to learn everything you possibly can, practice everything as much as you can, so you build those new habits and you can implement them in your organization you work with. So it's about understanding what is the responsibility of directors, what is the team we need to be building within the board and around the board, and then what's the methodology we use to make everything flow more smoothly, cover all the bases, what's best practice, all of those kind of things. So the ADP is all about this. It's about understanding what the team of directors does, what it looks like, how you build one, and what methodology you use to run the process. So the question always comes up, what's the difference between an MBA and applied directorship program? So MBA is very much about business administration. This is entirely focused on directorship. So if you want to be a managing director, then an MBA is a better choice. If you want to be a director, non-exec or exec, it doesn't matter, but you want to move into that directorship level space, that piece between shareholders and managers, then this is the program for you, because it's designed to give you everything you need to know to be truly effective in that room, in that boardroom. And that's why we don't have it as a 1-week full-time intense course. It needs to be extended because you need to get used to fitting it in and around your day-to-day life. And we don't want it to be just theory. So we have theory and simulation, not one or the other. So there's simulated board meetings where you run a company on an American-based company simulation software. And there's the theory in videos and books and the discussions with the facilitator, etc. So we're trying to make sure that we're doing both, so that it's, again, gives you the reference point that you can refer to later, but it gives you the practical stuff that you can then redo in your own organization, but you've got confidence because you've been through it. Sorry, see you go, Juliana. I see you've got a poor connection. Yeah, please send any questions if you have any. So it's 11 programs. The first module is about the introduction. So we talk about some of the stuff we've touched on today, craft first enterprise, the 3 hats of shareholder, director, manager. What are they? What are their responsibilities, etc. Then the second session goes much more into understanding how you put a board together. So how would you select directors? How do you build a board based on profiling, the skill sets, etc. required? And then talks a little bit about the sort of basic foundational things that you do at the beginning of the journey with a board, like setting up a board calendar. So as part of the program, you get a board calendar. So all of these modules on a list, and you've probably seen it already. These are the dates when these modules are happening. These are the times when they're happening. These are your board meetings, effectively. This is like joining a company, and here's your board calendar for the year. Module 3, you start to get into the simulated board meetings, and we start to get into the governance compass. And the first section is strategy and direction. So top of the compass, the starting point of everything. Where are we going and why? Then you move into section 4, or module 4, which is the organizational culture. So building on, we know where we're going. Have we got the organizational culture to help and support us getting there? So do we understand how we even define culture in a business? How do we develop it? How do we spread the word? How do we make sure that everybody is accountable against that culture? It's a critical piece of what the board should be defining. It should be making sure that you have a proper organizational culture strategy, because if you don't have the culture driving the strategy, then the chance of strategy being effective and being delivered is much, much less. Then we move into performance management, and an example of chief executive performance enhancement process. So that's part of the board meeting. and just thinking about that whole effective leadership kind of space. So we know where we're going, we've got the cultural organization. Now, do we have the right people, and how do we find them, and how do we make sure that we're recruiting them, etc. So it comes back to the CEO point that who was it, can't think, made earlier. Britt. Then you move into module 6, which is stakeholder engagement. So thinking in and it's been great that the South African context has got a much broader understanding of stakeholders, but businesses now are learning to understand that it's not just shareholders anymore. It's the staff, it's the community, it's social impact, environment, etc., etc. So we talk a lot about that in this particular section. Then you move on to shareholder expectations. So have the shareholders actually defined what their expectations are of the board? What are the goals they're driving you towards? Is it company value? Is it dividend return? What is it? Have they written it down? So a lot of videos, etc., trying to explain dividend policies and how they can impact and encourage and bring in the right shareholders. Then we talk about risks and compliance. So a big topic, and typically all people think of when they think of governance, but as we're demonstrating here, it's 1/8 of the things you need to be talking about. But as a board, are we actually going through a risk matrix? Are we actually evaluating what the risks are of the organization? And then 9, budget setting, financials, etc. 10 is the board evaluation. So we do an annual board evaluation at the end of the cycle. So you get to experience it. And then the 11th module is about doing a reflection exercise. And by popular demand, funny enough, when we first ran the program. So this is what the contribution compass looks like. Everybody has one of these 8 profiles, but we all have like a blend, a fingerprint of the individual energies. So one coach may not be exactly the same behavior as another coach, etc., etc. But it's a very, very valuable tool when looking at building teams. And the governance compass is these 8 segments here. So in summary, it's an 11-month program. We've got a maximum 20 cohort, which are made up in 3 or 4 simulated boards, as I said, where you get a company name and you are allocated to your team. 8 board meetings. And the time commitment for the board meetings is only 4 hours a month. That's 4 hours a month session. So it's like having a monthly board meeting. And then 3 to 4 hours per week, preparation, online learning, watching videos, reading books, etc., etc. So a network of like-minded individuals is what you get. And because we're running these online, we have now people from all over Africa on these courses, which is fantastic. And rather than a diploma, we give you a certificate of attendance and competence, because this is very much about teaching new habits and teaching you how to do self-reflection rather than taking exams, because that's what being a director is all about. There's no exam for being a director. You need to take responsibility and do the work. So it's important to understand that this is not a guarantee. So we have a directors network. We can't guarantee you're going to get a non-exec director position, but we can put you in a place where you've probably got as good a chance as anybody, and probably a better chance than most to get those positions, because it just gives you the confidence that you know what you're talking about. So we invite you to join the program so that we challenge your thinking. I've had many people who say they come out of the course and it's actually fundamentally changed the way they think in board meetings. And that's critical. We need to be much more inquiring. We need to be asking the right questions. We need to be leaders in that room. Prove your prospects for non-exec direct positions if that's what you're looking for, and begin your direct journey as a high-performing director, whether it's in your existing organization or in someone else's. And Buffett says best investment is in yourself. So if you don't know, this is what the fee rates are currently. Various payment plans, so please talk to the person who introduced you, or give me a call to find out about monthly payment plans or quarterly or whatever it makes sense for you. And for today, do these on the monthly webinars. Anyone who's in attendance is registered for this webinar. If you book before the end of the month, then we give you a $250 voucher that you can either pay for one of your other staff members, team members, friends, colleagues to join one of our shorter programs, or obviously you can just put it against your deposit. Sorry, someone put their hand up. I'm just scrolling through the list. Bode Oseni, did you have a particular question? Have you put something in chat?
Bode, you can ask your question.
You should be able to unmute yourself. I think, Solly, if you switched him on to unmute. Talking permitted, it says. Okay, if you just then put it in the chat box if it was a question. That's just make a note of it, jot it down, which will be in the email that follows this call. If you're keen to register, then that's the code, the short code, bit.ly.adponline, all in capitals, and then we'll get in touch and make sure that you've got all the invoices you need and information and the starting packs and all of the stuff that goes with it. So that's what the application form looks like. If it looks like that, you're on the right page. And Solly, who's also on this call, is the program manager. So again, if you have any, maybe Solly, do you want to put your email in the box if anybody has any questions specifically for you about the program itself? So is it the preparation at base camp, not during the climb, that gets you to the summit? So what are we doing to prepare? We want to be high quality directors. We want to be great directors. What are we doing to prepare for that? What are we doing to make sure that we're ready for that climb? We're ready for the heights of Everest or Kilimanjaro, where you have to stop and breathe a little bit because it's pretty rarefied up there. And that's what being director is actually about. It's you've got less time to think. You've got to make decisions quickly. You've got to be really thorough in your preparation, etc. So what do you get? You get Traversing the Avalanche. We have another book called Extreme Business Success. If you're interested, particularly good for family members or other members of the organization, just to give them an insight into three hats and the various contexts of how a family influences a business, etc. The other option, if the applied directorship program is just a bridge too far for now, then we have other workshops, for example, high performance board one-day workshop. So that might be a good first step if the applied directorship program is a little bit too far. So applied directorship program starts on the 9th of September. We have a few spaces for the current cohort. If you want to start like right now, it's already started. So we do a catch-up session for the first one. So you could start right now or start the applied directorship program on 9th of September. And then we've got a couple of high performance board workshops between now and then. So as I said, it might be a good way of getting a bit of a taste, seeing if the information shared is of value before you make the full commitment. So as I said, let me know, get in touch, email me, call me if you're in South Africa, or even if you're on a WhatsApp from elsewhere, and I can talk you through that stuff. So thank you very much, everybody. Slightly over, I apologize for that. Some good questions though. Just check any other questions. Again, yeah, please, if you send questions, you can send them to my email address or drop me a WhatsApp and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So thank you for your attendance. Thank you for staying on the call to the end. Really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best for this afternoon and a fabulous weekend.